is very clear that they intend to make sure that this administration fails. I'm getting good intelligence report on a daily basis. The question of insecurity in the country is being mentioned all over the world, not only here in Nigeria. But I believe there are Nigerians that will attempt at least to be fair. By what I believed, that I will run the country according to the Constitution. Now, with all these people who want power, whoever they are, have they proved that I was not following the Constitution? Well, am I not leading the country according to the Constitution? What do they want? So whoever wanted diversion or destruction of the system at this point, I think will soon have their shock of their lives. I think we have given them enough latitude. They have made their case. They just wanted to destroy the country. Simple. Because what do they want? And we are concentrating on infrastructure because no country or institution can be developed without infrastructure. Now, for those of us who are unfortunate to be in the field for the 30 months of the Civil War, to see the carnage of how we kill ourselves, at least 1 million people, I think those that are misbehaving, they were either too young, they didn't know what happened. But for those of us who went through all these things, we can't understand. So we will treat them in the language they understand. So I feel for your understanding and so on. We are going to be very hard sooner than later. We have done our best, changed the service chiefs and the IG. We allow them time to go around to make necessary changes for them to be firmly in charge. We'll try and give them the resources they require, and we will demand security sooner than later. I thank you very much for your presentation. I assure you that this administration will do whatever we can do for you so that we don't give anybody excuse to blame us that we don't want to go or want to have a third term.
Well, those are some of the issues which we'll be taking on this morning. That was the president speaking in a meeting with the INEC Chairman, Professor Moghalu, who had taken their concerns about the burning of INEC offices and how it could impact the 2023 elections to the president. And at that meeting, the president did say a number of things, raising questions to his critics about whether or not he's running the country according to the Constitution, concerns about secessionist movements in the Southeast, saying that they didn't see the Civil War, and that's one of the reasons why, or the war, as it will, we can say, and that's one of the reasons why perhaps they're behaving in the way that they are behaving, and that saying that he'll treat them in the language that they understand. Now, what that language will be, well, it's not yet clear, but he did say that they're going to go down hard to those who are bent on destroying the country and to arsonists as well. Well, that the full length of that particular conversation will be on our website in case you missed it, channelstv.com, just in case you want to listen to it again. But this morning, we're being joined by Mr. Kingsley Moghalu, who is a former presidential candidate and also a former deputy governor at the Central Bank of Nigeria. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you.
Well, you have been pretty vocal on issues in the country, and a number of things are happening almost at the same time. It's one of the very rare occasions where we've had the president speak. Oftentimes when people go for meetings, the photo ops are done and maybe a few words, and then that's it. Pressmen are asked to to excuse them. But on this occasion, the president, it would seem, seized the opportunity to address a number of things happening in the country presently. I don't know if you were able to hear clearly what he said.
Yes, I heard.
Because of the technical issues we have here. But what were your thoughts? Do you think that he was able to sufficiently address some of the concerns which are on the minds of people today, especially with regards to security?
Well, I mean, I heard the bit on the attacks on INEC offices and infrastructure. And I think I can understand the frustrations all over the country with these attacks on government installations. But, and when he was speaking specifically about the civil war, first of all, I mean, I think we need to know who exactly is behind these attacks. But to the extent he started speaking about the civil war, he was right up to the point where he was saying that some of the separatists, people who were demanding secession and so on, and maybe being a bit aggressive about it, were people who had not seen the war. I saw the war. I was a young child, and war is terrible. I want to tell you, war is terrible. It may sound romantic, but it is not in reality. And therefore, we must avoid conflict, armed conflict, and civil war in this country and destruction. But to the point he then said, we will treat them in the language they understand. I did not think that that was the kind of statement he should have made as the president of the country. I think language matters when you are a leader and when you're facing a crisis, because that language can be interpreted in so many ways. A lot of horrible things happened during the Civil War. It involved several violations of international humanitarian law. A lot of war crimes were committed in that Civil War, mainly against citizens of one particular side in the war. So when you're saying that we will treat them in the language they understand, you see, you're bringing up evocations that are very unpleasant. You can say that the government will take appropriate measures to protect the security and the physical safety of government institutions. That's what the government is supposed to do. So that's, if I were president, that's what I would have said. I would not say we would treat any citizens of Nigeria or any people from any part of Nigeria in the quote-unquote in the language they understand when that statement is made in the context of something terrible that happened over 50 years ago. That's my comment.
But when you look at the danger that it portends for the entire country,
yes,
and when you look at the current state of insecurity
yes,
you currently pervading the Southeast,
sure,
some people will say that statement was not out of place.
Well, you see, I've given you, as a leader, what I would do or how I would say what he said. The security situation in the Southeast, I have condemned killings in the Southeast. Any violence that is, that is unnecessary, unsenseless, unlawful, I condemn it. It doesn't matter whether it is violence against policemen or security agents. It doesn't matter whether it is violence by state officials or state security officials. There have been reports of unofficial executions happening in the region as well. It doesn't matter whether it's the assassination of Ahmed Gulak, which was a terrible thing and very condemnable thing. So I think, we have to make every effort to restore peace in that region and other parts of Nigeria. Now, the point is this. There are many places in Nigeria that are theaters of low-level war at this point, especially the Northeast. We know what's happening in the Northeast. And so what happens is that when you respond to the rising violence in the Southeast in a manner that shows a lot of muscularity, but we know that the government has not been able to contain the full-blown terrorism and war against the country in the Northeast, people begin to draw inferences of a double standard. And this, I think, is what the government must avoid. Now, the whole question of the secessionist movement there is the government is running the risk of making that movement mainstream by its response. I think that the government should be able to invite, whether it's the IPOB or Sunday Igboho, all the secessionists, invite them to the table. They are essentially political agitators. You can call them terrorists. That's your own prerogative. But we know what terrorism means in reality. You know, the people who, the Boko Haram are terrorists. We know that. You know, so when people begin political agitation and you very easily throw terrorism at them, just because they are mouthing off and speaking in language that nobody likes, you know, or insulting, their fellow citizens, that's there are ways to handle those types of things. So you bring them to the table and say, what's the grouse? This country needs to be stable. This country needs to be peaceful. Can we address the agitation? Don't be afraid to address the core reason behind the agitation. That's because they are crying out for justice. They feel marginalized. What's wrong with addressing that issue? So, I believe Nigeria should be one country and can function properly.
So you say that even though the manner in which they have gone about this is very questionable.
Yes.
And it's a bit extremist, it would seem, especially in language and perhaps also the ends of the agitation. The government should confer some legitimacy on it by inviting them. Don't you think that's a danger that government runs when
Let me explain
does
something to you. There's a way we tend to think in this country. In Spain, the Catalonian region wants to secede. In Canada, Quebec wanted to secede. In the United Kingdom, Scotland wants to move out of the United Kingdom. Everywhere in the world, you have these nationalist tendencies. There is nothing new about it happening in Nigeria. It's about how you respond to it. You say, okay, you want to have a referendum, but it's not in the Constitution. So why don't you go through the political route?
The nationalist tendencies, some people will say there's nothing wrong with that. It is the how that is the question right now.
Sure.
I mean, there have been huge questions about what happened in the Niger Delta happened, and it would seem that we still haven't quite recovered from that because we're now seeing people making comparisons, however, illogical it might sound, with bandits in the north about how they're going about and how they too need to be called to the table, especially in the face of the atrocities they're committing. And then we also hear now, even though you say that the manner in which they're going about it is not right.
Who is going about it?
The secessionist people, the way they're calling for secession, the language and the manner in which they're going about it, is questionable. You have agreed that much. If that is the case, do you think that government wouldn't stand the risk of conferring legitimacy on these agitations?
What I said, to be very clear, is this. If people are violent, then the government has the right to respond to protect the citizens of Nigeria and to protect Nigerian territory. If people are not violent, but they're mouthing a political agitation, that should never have been made criminal. It is an expression of their view. The government should then say, if this is gaining traction, here is what we need. We need to sit down and talk about.
Do you think words can be violent?
Of course, words can be aggressive. There's hate language. There's hate speech. Sure, and I disagree with those things. I would never support hate speech. I would never support violence in any way. Sure, it's possible.
So if, for instance, I mean, there are people who will say that there are those who will act violent.
Yes.
And there are those who will speak violently.
You know, let me...
Or aggressively.
Yes, let me tell you something. Why are we avoiding addressing the issue that is behind these agitations? Why do we always focus on the agitation itself and on criminalizing it? It is just a lack of leadership. That's my own approach. Go to the root cause. Go to the root cause. If people are feeling alienated anywhere in the country, reassure them. Address the issue. Is there some inequity in the country? In political representation or opportunity, leadership opportunity? Is there some inequity in appointments? Is there nepotism going on? All these things, go and address the root cause. That's my point. It's a very lazy way of addressing issues like this, to just, always focus on what the agitators are doing, but you don't want to address what their complaints are. I don't think that's leadership. I think that's a failure of leadership. That's my quest. That's my approach. But I do believe that this country has a lot of potential. It can work. Nigeria can work well. It's not the only heterogeneous country in the world. Many countries are, homogeneous, that is, people of one ethnicity, but there are many more countries that have a combination of. And the best way to run a country like Nigeria is for it to have a proper federal system. That's the point. Proper federalism. Give people space to grow and pursue their aspirations within the same country. But there shouldn't be over-centralized control from the center. And that's what we have today. That's part of the problem. Why don't we go and address that root issue rather than, just...
Indeed, the root issues are there.
Yes.
And they have been articulated even by groups that are not considered extremists, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah.
Of course, one would think that maybe sometimes government usually waits until something gets a bit extreme before they begin to address some of the issues, as we see even with things like strikes, labor unions and agitations. But you said something about constitution and federalism, and some people will say it would seem that conversation is happening also about the appropriate time, because the National Assembly is undertaking a constitution amendment. This is the time which they're going around the country now and engaging the public in terms of what they would like to see in the constitution. For you, what do you think are some of the things that hamper and hinder our development in this current constitution that you'd like to see amended or taken out?
You cannot have a secure country in a country like Nigeria today without state police. It's not possible. The federal government is spread too thin. They're overstretched. That's one. Secondly, you cannot have a prosperous economy in Nigeria today with control, with resource control, resting in the central government. That is a core breach of the principles of federalism. That's not... The oil in Alaska, in America, belongs to Alaska. It doesn't belong to Washington. So in Nigeria, when you say the oil in the Niger Delta or the gold or in Zamfara or the nickel in Kaduna belongs to the federal government, and then they will now take their share and allocate to the states or the local governments, that is to put federalist principles upside down. It is the subnational units that sit over those resources that are supposed to have complete control over them, and then, under a constitutional formula, remit some part of that, their revenues to the federal government. That's proper federalism. So these are some of the things we see. We have 68 items or so on the exclusive legislative list of the Constitution. That is by far too much. It shouldn't be more than 20 or 25 at any rate. And most other things should come down to the governments of the states or the regions. And the third problem is that in a proper federation, there should only be two tiers of the Constitution: the central government and the subnational government. Local governments are not supposed to be in the Constitution. It is the subnational governments that are supposed to create local governance as they wish. So these are principles of federalism that everybody who is educated in constitutional matters or political matters understands. But because we had many years of military rule, you find that there's a very top-heavy approach to the powers of the central government. And I think this is what is causing the problem, especially in the area of security and especially in the area of the economy. Nigeria will never prosper so long as we have this current type of regime, because it makes everybody lazy. All the money from oil comes to the federal government, so all the politicians fight for control of the federal government. And you go to the federal government, there's nothing much productive going on. You find them waiting for oil to balance their budget, and when oil prices crash, they go a-borrowing. And we know that whoever goes a-borrowing goes a-sorrowing. That's why we're having the economic mess we're having, because of the constitutional construct of the country.
Well, I don't know how hopeful you are, because this is not the first time we're doing a constitutional amendment. And there are those who say, oh, so far so good. The Constitution is as bad as it might look, or as terrible as it is. We haven't even started operating this Constitution. A number of the things ingrained in the Constitution are not being followed, and that's one of the reasons why we're where we are. I don't know what you make of that school of thought.
My view about, I believe, I'm part of the school of thought that believes that Nigeria needs a new Constitution. We need a people's constitution. This constitution was not made by the people. It was a hurried arrangement by the military as they were about to leave power in 1999. And given all the tensions in Nigeria today, I think it would be a much better approach, rather than panel beating the 1999 constitution, to create a new chassis, a new constitution that Nigerian people agree. And I think it is possible to manufacture that consensus so that they can agree on something where everybody feels fairly and equitably treated in that process. I think that would be a much better way to go to produce lasting peace in our country.
Let's take questions now from my colleagues in Lagos.
Thank you, Marco. Mr. Moghalu, beg your pardon, Dr. Moghalu, one category of people that I am particularly concerned about are the youth. And even in the process that you have talked about, one of the monarchs also asked the members of the National Assembly at that forum that how come youths weren't represented at the meeting where they had, the members of the National Assembly, monarchs, and the rest of them. Perhaps it's a challenge of engagement as opposed to that of real, hard, true, progressive conversation with the youth. Is it a challenge of, okay, we don't know how to engage them, or we don't need to engage them? What's your thinking?
Well, my view is that the youth are fundamentally not engaged in any conversation about Nigeria's future. That is wrong. Every society must really pay priority attention to its youth, because the future of that society depends on the young people. So when you're creating a future, it is a future that those young people will inherit. Why would you be having those kinds of conversations without those young people at the table? Secondly, in Nigeria, when people talk about youth, you see a lot of, how should I say, tokenism. Let us invite the youth just for photo ops. But the mindset in the political leadership of this country is not one that recognizes the importance of the youth, their fundamental place in nation building. The youth are the posterity of any country. I mean, as Benjamin Disraeli, former Prime Minister of Britain, said. But if you want to look at what's happening in Nigeria, it looks as if what is happening is what one of the former presidents of the United States, Herbert Hoover, said, that blessed are the youth, they will inherit the national debt. That seems to be what is happening in Nigeria today. The youth are receiving a very, very unfair deal. Look at youth unemployment. Look at the unemployment in the country, 33%. Most affected are the young people. People are out of school for 10 years, no jobs. So The whole architecture of the country, the whole architecture of its politics needs to reflect the youth at its core. That's my own view, and that has always been my position since I entered the political terrain in this country. That the future of Nigeria belongs to the youth in reality and should be designed and executed mostly by young people.
Exactly. The question then would be the process of engaging these young people. You know, they form the core of the, those who vote, the voters in the country. They form the core of the population. So the challenge then is, how should we, as a nation, from the leadership, be engaging the youths, whether at the federal level or at the state levels?
I think that at every level of governance in this country, if it is not provided for in the Constitution as a matter of practice, young people should have a voice. How many young people are in the federal cabinet in Nigeria today? How many young people are in the National Assembly? So how many young people are in the economic policy making of this country? So we have a country that is skewed away from the large percentage of its population. About 65% of Nigeria's population is young people, and yet all decision making. So I would say that as a matter of instinct, that begins with political leadership. So the next political leadership of Nigeria, I argue, should involve a generational shift to people who are younger. Age also is in the mind, but I think the younger people are physically, the more likely they are to relate to people who are younger than them or in that same age group. So I believe that the political leadership of this country, the next time around, should have a lot more younger people. And then you will see this process happen much more naturally. When they're excluded from politics, when you say to the young people, and the young people themselves have a responsibility, they should not just wait for the thing to be brought to them. They also have to enter and engage. In the political terrain, there are three ways of engagement. One, you should register and vote in elections. That's very important. Two, you should be able to join political parties. Three, you can run for office. All three should be happening at the same time. But you find that a lot of young people, they are interested in running for elections, but then they find out that the form for the office is too expensive. But many do not vote, and certainly many do not belong to political parties.
Dr. Moghalu, just 1 second. There are a number of things you have. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. Yeah, just 1 second. You've raised a number of issues, in how the youth can get involved. But then there needs to be exactly how. Should that be happening? And then don't also forget, the trust deficit has been greatly depleted. We'll take that on when we return from this break. Just stay with us.
The House of Representatives begins its zonal public hearings on Constitution review, a week after the commencement of that of the Senate. In Bauchi State, the NLC chapters of Borno, Yobe and Bauchi State present a harmonized submission calling for withdrawal of immunity.
Immunity clause with particular reference to criminal investigation and prosecutions should be removed from the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and allow state governors and their deputies, president and his vice, to undergo criminal and other investigations when the situation warrants.
The Bauchi State Governor on his part reiterates his position on the creation of Katagum State.
We are greatly concerned that smaller states than Bauchi have more local governments and representatives in the House of Representatives and get more funds than Bauchi State from the Federation account.
Meanwhile, in Adamawa State, the Labour Union and the state governor appear to be on the same page concerning local government autonomy.
We have also advanced our arguments on other matters of national importance. These issues include local government autonomy, legislative autonomy, and the judicial autonomy.
It should be provided in the Constitution that the local government should be granted autonomy in terms of their administration. The tenure of office for all local governments should be uniform throughout the Federation. Financial autonomy should be granted in the Constitution.
Governor Fintiri further advises that there is no perfect constitution anywhere in the world, and what is required is the collective resolve of citizens to allow the available provisions work. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Thanks for staying with us. Dr. Moghalu, you have given us some three very critical points on how youth can begin to get into the system. And then you have also raised a fundamental issue of funding. How do you think we can address that question of funding, which is a challenge that young people might have in the process of wanting to get into the system? Anything you think the Electoral Act can do in that regard?
Yes, I think the Electoral Act should create very, very strict laws, levels beyond which the cost of entering into a political process should never go beyond. And that means that those costs should be made accessible. It should be criminalized for a party to set its forms above certain thresholds where many young people cannot afford. This is one way to open up the system for young people to get involved in politics. There's also a problem of access to funding in economic terms. Before I entered this studio, I was just talking to the Director General of the National Youth Service Corps, Brigadier General Ibrahim, and he was explaining to me some of the, reforms or some of the improvements they're doing in the National Youth Service Corps, including trying to give youth corpers money to set up new businesses when they leave, when they finish youth corps. When I ran for president in 2019, I said that Nigeria needs a massive venture capital fund such that, and we can connect this to the National Youth Service for people graduating from universities as just one portion of that fund to support enterprise from young people who are coming out of university to be able to set up their own businesses. Because part of the problem of the youth in Nigeria, in fact, a fundamental problem, is they do not have economic empowerment. So because of this economic disempowerment, they are disempowered across the whole board. So this is what I'm saying. Another way to approach issues of the youth, we have a national youth policy. So, we should as much as possible look at this policy and see how to actually make it impact the lives of Nigeria's young people. I don't think enough of this has been done. We also have the avenue of sports. That's another possibility. But I would say, if I were to be president of this country, one of the first things that I would do is that we would set up an intergenerational equity council. What will this council do? This council would look at the whole problem of the youth and leadership and engagement in the Nigerian society, across politics, across economics, and many
One other
areas.
question that I think I would like for you
innovation.
to respond to on this particular issue. You've spoken largely
Yes.
about a number of things, but there is the challenge of trust. I don't know if you will agree, but many people believe that the trust deficit between the governed and the government is greatly depleted. Yeah. So for people to even be interested in voting, you would know the trajectory of the voting numbers between 1999 and the last election have greatly, over the years, dwindled. Now, to get the same youth who have pretty much lost, hope in the electoral process, which is the only form of government we have decided that we want to run. How do we begin to restore that confidence in government that will lead to interest in the electoral process that will bring these young people into government, just as you are proposing?
INEC, the Independent National Electoral Commission, this is its task, to make the voting process accessible to everyone, to give us as citizens, including the young people, confidence that their votes will count and be counted. They have this task. Ahead of the next set of elections, they must engage heavily in voter education. They did a bit of it in 2019, but not as much as they should have. And it is because of this gap that you find a lot of civil society organizations, such as the one that I set up to build a nation, trying
Dr.
to
Moghalu,
get involved in voter
Dr.
education.
Moghalu, the job of INEC ends at the point of the elections. Once the elections are done, INEC's job is done. I'm talking about the governance part, where people have lost a lot.
That is not true.
Okay, please go ahead then. Because many people hold the opinion that as soon as the elections are done, elections are done, it's the time of governance. Governance is the job of the people that have been elected to do their jobs. Now, for those who are not doing their jobs enough, people have already lost interest, lost confidence in the process.
I am trying to say to you that INEC has a very critical role to play in restoring this confidence by allowing the youth to be able to get involved in the electoral process and elect the kinds of people who are more competent, who have a bit more vision than what we have seen in governance in Nigeria today. So you must engineer this process from the root. And in a democracy, the root is the electoral process. Now, INEC has a duty, not just after the elections are done, they go to sleep and then wake up in the, 4 years later. That's not what the Electoral Act, says, and that's not what INEC's job is. INEC has a job to ensure that continuous voter registration. INEC has a job to ensure that voters are properly educated to be able to make informed electoral decisions. That's what INEC should be doing. So INEC has a big role. If people have more confidence in the elections, if more young people get involved, go and get their PVC, and actually vote in elections, if the elections are secure, then they are likely to be more able to elect better leaders. So what you have in Nigeria today is politics without governance, unfortunately, and we're suffering for it. So INEC has a very important role to play, and that's what I'm saying. It's not enough to go to sleep in between elections.
Well, one other thing that, the questions still are still quite large there about the role INEC can play when government has its job done. Now, there is also the issue or the task, the challenge of the infrastructure or institutions. How strong or not are they to ensure that the needful is done? In other climes, some that you have also, drawn our attention to, the civil service, for instance, has a way of ensuring that the system continues irrespective of who is in office. And there are a number of people who have, including the President of the Senate, who have said that we have a challenge with the institutions themselves being weaker than the individuals that head them in most cases. How do you think we can begin to reverse that trend? Because to a large extent, we seem to look always at the individuals at the top as opposed to the institutions doing what is needful.
Yes, no country can make progress without strong institutions. And the first way to guarantee strong institutions is to have the legal framework of governance tightened up to protect institutions from temporary or transitional politicians who are in office for 4 years or 8 years, as the case may be. If you look, for example, at the appointment of the chairman of INEC, why should the president be the one to appoint the chairman of INEC? Why must the president appoint practically everybody in this country? That's part of the problem. And so, because there are too many powers in the president's hands, if the president is the kind of person that wants to control institutions or does not believe in the independence of institutions, then it becomes easy to manipulate these institutions. The laws should protect the institutions a lot more than is the case today. What do we see in Nigeria today? Political party apparatchiks, card-carrying members of parties are appointed director generals of very important government parastatals. This should not be the case. The members of the board of directors could be politically affiliated, but I think it's wrong to be appointing politicians as, you know, pretty much CEOs of government institutions. This is one of the reasons why there is no separation today between a lot of government institutions and the political party that is in power, whether at the federal level or at the state levels. The National Assembly has a very strong role to play. And I don't think that role is being played to the full.
But some people say that there should be a delicate balance, because after people, it's always seen as I don't want to say spoils of war, but oftentimes if elections are fought as hardly as, you know, wars are fought, some people see those kinds of things as the spoils of office, and that you have to find a way to compensate party members. But how would you recommend that balance be? That
balance is what I have just said.
Yes.
That you may appoint politically affiliated people to the boards of government corporations. But one of the problems with this is that it has led to a complete breakdown of corporate governance in the public sector. There's no corporate governance in Nigeria's public sector. All our institutions are
politically affiliated people will mean technocrats, non-core politicians?
I mean core politicians.
Okay.
Appointing too many of them into boards, and as is the case today, as CEOs, not just the boards. So I would say that the dividing line must stop at the board level. CEOs and down should be career technocrats. That's the approach I would take. Now, even at the board level, you should be also able to appoint people who may not be politically affiliated and mix them with politically affiliated people, so there's a balance of corporate governance in government institutions. So, but looking at the public sector as spoils of political war is why this country is not being governed properly. The economy is grounded, security is grounded, everything is grounded in this country today. Not much is moving, with very few exceptions. And that's because we are engaged in politics without governance. We need to begin to focus far more on governance and electing people who understand what governance means. That's why, for example, I have offered myself for the presidency of this country, because if I had that opportunity, I would bring knowledge and a determination for good governance into the whole system, not just as politics.
It's early days yet.
I know, I'm not campaigning. Oh, not at all.
It's early days yet for campaign, but I want to ask you, as we see, you know, the kinds of memoranda that are coming forth
yes.
to the National Assembly and to the public hearing, are you optimistic that anything fundamental is going to be done to change what people think is wrong with our Constitution?
I'm not very optimistic. I'm not very optimistic, because if you look at the character of Nigerian politicians today, look, Nigeria, people talk about, you know, ethnicity, tribe, religion. There are only two tribes in Nigeria today: the politicians and the people. And those politicians are across all the ethnic groups. Many of them will conspire, loot, and share together, regardless of whether they are Christians or Muslims or whatever. And the people who are suffering from the misgovernance of this country cut across tribes. Poverty does not know religion. The woman whose price of food has doubled in the last year, it does not affect you based on what religion you are or what ethnic group you are. So that is the point. We need to recognize this fact. And the only thing that can solve it is the electoral process. We need to bring about a new vision of leadership and governance into this country. And the only way to do that is through elections, by electing people who have those kinds of mindsets. That's the point I'm trying to make. If you don't solve that problem at this fundamental level, the character of Nigerian politics will remain the same. And the consequence is that we will not be properly governed, and we will remain a poor, underdeveloped country today. If you look, for example, at the Nigerian citizen also has a role to play. Of course they do. You see, just to make one final point, there is something in this country that is kind of opposed to intellectuals in politics. So you see people, citizens, saying, oh, that man is blowing grammar. You see what I'm saying? It tells you that the citizen himself does not know what he or she actually needs for his or her own progress. You see what I'm saying? If you have been electing people who are not blowing grammar, they're doing the quote-unquote practical, well, how far? Why is the economy the way it is? Why is the security situation the way it is? If you cannot think it, you cannot do it. Intellect matters. Why is it that all the foreign investment, car manufacturing plants, Twitter, now the manufacturing of COVID vaccines, everything is going to Ghana? The president of Ghana, have you heard him speak? Have you been in, you understand. Ideas, the man has ideas. So this is the point. Our people should understand that intellect, ideas are what rule the world. And they should look in their political representatives for people who have those kinds of characteristics. The reason they don't is that the current political class has pulverized the minds of our citizens. And our citizens' minds have become enslaved by our politicians to serve the interests of those politicians. And that's terrible.
Well, all eyes on the electoral process as we approach 2023. Let us see how just that goes, especially with the complaint of the INEC chairman that those elections could be under threat with the current situation, the threat already being posed to its offices by burning and all manner of dangers, even to its own personnel, it would seem. But we have to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. We will be following your thoughts also as you articulate them in papers and wherever else you're writing. Well, thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Elite this morning. Dr. Kingsley Moghalu is a former presidential candidate and also a former deputy governor at the Central Bank of Nigeria. Thank you once again for coming on Sunrise.
Thank you very much.